I love the Dark Souls series. I love its gameplay. I love its level design. I love its co-op, its invasions, and its difficulty. I love the feeling of going through a new area for the first time, of getting very excited every time I pick up an item. I love playing at launch day, or soon after, and getting invaded before the meta has been discovered or established, and before you or your invader know what you're doing. I love fighting bosses. I love learning their patterns and seeing their personality shine out through their moveset. And of course, I love losing, too. I love every single aspect of this game. But the thing I love the most, the crown jewel of Dark Souls, is the story. And I'm not the only one who thinks so. Even a brief search on YouTube will yield thousands of hours of lore videos by hundreds of people, each of us obsessed by what we experienced when we finished the game. However, in general, these videos are focused on what I consider to be the least interesting part of the story, which is the lore as it is, the lore as it is presented. What happens when and in what order? What game comes before what? Much of what I see is very narrowly focused on the details of the plot. In my view, the most interesting part is not the lore, but the lore's metaphorical significance. It doesn't matter so much what happens. The important part is what it means in a story. What is the writer's original intent? What is Miyazaki trying to convey? Dark Souls is a masterpiece, and like every masterpiece, it means more than it is. There is no doubt that Miyazaki is using metaphors to weave his tale. The only question is, what are they? What do they mean? And what is the central theme that they are all in service to? And it is precisely that question that I will try to answer in this video. What is the central, overarching theme in these games? What is the point in Dark Souls? Now, before we go anywhere, I think it would be beneficial if we take a small moment to talk about archetypal themes. Archetypal themes are story archetypes that recur over and over and over in literature and myth. Archetypal themes are ancient, like really ancient. Some possibly older than the written word. Archetypal themes and motifs are cross-cultural, and appear even among people who would never have had the opportunity to interact. Comparative mythology is the study of myths from different cultures in an attempt to identify these common themes and motifs. Studying these commonalities can help us better understand why human psychology found these themes important enough to repeat, even in the stories we tell today. One probable reason is because while the number of stories that could exist are close to infinite, the number of stories that will be psychologically compelling to a human being are very limited, and all those stories have to compete with each other for human time and human attention. Out of this process of competition, the stories change, they become refined, they borrow from each other, and ultimately they result in a story whose imagery and themes capture the imagination in a society for generations. Because humans around the world are more the same than they are different, and because their stories had to undergo a similar selection process, the themes and motifs in those stories have striking parallels. It's similar to why there are so many pyramid-like structures in so many places on the Earth. There are only so many ways to efficiently distribute weight on tall structures. Now, I'm telling you this because Hidetaka Miyazaki knows about and utilizes these mythological motifs in his games. And these uses are not just references. They have metaphorical significance that is crucial for understanding the central theme of his games. I'm convinced that fire in Dark Souls isn't just some vague positive force, and dark some ambiguous negative force, or vice versa. If for no other reason than that would be stupid. And the creator of Dark Souls is not stupid. So, with that introduction out of the way, let's go ahead and dive right into the premise of this video. Fire, in Dark Souls, is a metaphor for civilization and the civilizing force. Dark, then, is a metaphor for base humanity, that is, uncivilized humanity devoid of fire. Fire has always represented civilization. In Greek myth, Prometheus gives fire to mankind, which enables them to cultivate civilization. Likewise, Azazel, the fallen angel from the Book of Enoch, taught humanity the use of fire in tool use. Fire is associated with human progress, intelligence, and civilization, for obvious reasons. Since we got our hands on it, we've been using fire and light to carve away at the dark. And today, whenever you find an abundance of light, you will also find civilization. In fact, you won't find one without the other. In-game references to fire as civilization are more obscure and don't really make sense unless you keep in mind the dark's association with humanity. Thankfully, that is an easier bridge to cross. The connection between the dark and humanity is obvious. It's stated outright in every game.
Very well. Humans are of the dark, and you are no different. Some may avert their eyes, but the truth remains the truth.
Now, I can tell that you're skeptical, but for the moment let's just assume that I'm right. The first flame is civilization, and the dark is uncivilized man. If we re-examine the events of the games with this new framing in mind, everything starts making a lot more sense. The opening cinematic shows us when the first flame was discovered, and, shambling towards it, are creatures that look very much like hollows. Now, whether they are actually hollows is not important. Both hollows and the creatures that came from the dark look the way they do to emphasize their lowly state, before the advent of fire, before the civilizing force. Hollows are the original shape of humanity. This is blatantly stated by the entire Uria questline in Dark Souls 3, but it's been hinted at a lot throughout the series.
Wrest the flame from its mantle, so that we hollows, in most honest shape of man, may have it for our own. Our Lord of Hollows, it shall be, who weareth the true face of mankind.
Drang will fall, the fire will fade, and the souls of old will re-emerge. With dark unshackled, a curse will be upon us, and men will take their true shape. Dark will again be ours, and in our true shape, we can bury the false legends of yore.
It's symbolically meaningful that this true shape of man is what humans looked like before the first flame. Humans today wear clothes. We stand upright. We are taller. The humans of the modern world can look very powerful, very regal, very godlike even. We are a far cry today from the bipedal apes that had yet to discover flame. The opening cutscene goes on to tell us about the Age of Fire, and it makes a point to show us a grand city while it does. A walled city, in fact. The very symbol of order and light. Cities are a manifestation of civilization in the truest sense. In Dark Souls 1, you are the chosen undead. Your culture and legends tell you to make pilgrimage to Lordran, the land of ancient lords, the land of the past. There you are guided to link the fire, cast away the dark, and undo the curse of the undead. To this end you are bid defeat the ancient lords and acquire their lord souls. Let's think about what you're doing symbolically. These are the gods of the old world, conquerors of the dragons, and organizers of the world as we know it. They are the best of the past, the strongest, the most brilliant, the most influential. Yet now they are old and less than they were. Today they stand as obstacles to the preservation of the first flame. This, too, is a common mythological motif. Older, more primitive gods are replaced by younger and more civilized ones. In Greek myth, Kronos and the Titans overthrow Uranus and the primordial gods. Similarly, the Titans are eventually overthrown by Zeus and the Olympian gods, who go on to establish a divine and cosmic order. These deaths of the gods are also often linked with the creative sacrifice motif. For example, the Mesopotamian primal gods were also slain by their children, and the body of their primordial mother was used to form the heavens and the earth. Order and civilization is built on the body of dead gods. In Dark Souls, linking the fire requires you to slay the old gods, overcome what they represent, and unify them into a single, most worthy vessel. You are taking the best of the past, reconciling it with the present, and perpetuating it into the future in a new form. Take, for instance, the phrase, "link the fire." Why use that phrase specifically? What are you supposed to be linking, and to what? You are linking the past, and all that was, to the future. It can also be seen as creating a link, like a link in a chain that binds the fate of mankind. The linking of the flame is an act of creative sacrifice. It is using the body of dead gods to establish, perpetuate, and preserve the divine order. Fire and light represent order and civilization. It ennobles humans, but also binds and restricts them. Fire is laws, customs, taboos, and societal expectations. The dark is base humanity, devoid of the refining, civilizing force of fire. The ringed knight armor reads, "The armor of early men was forged in the abyss, and betrays a smidgen of life. For this reason the gods cast a seal of fire upon such armor, and those who possess them." It's telling that the ringed knight armor has what looks like a dark sign at its center. It clearly reveals what a dark sign is. It is a seal of fire that contains the spread of humanity. The ringed knight hood reads, "These knights don abyss-tainted black cloth, with layer upon layer hiding their eyes." This was nothing less than an attempt to reveal that which the seal of fire had occluded, a subtle defiance of the gods' wishes. The ring of fire occludes the base nature of humans and prevents them from taking their true shape, which is why the dark sigil from Uria's questline looks like a dark sign with the seal of fire removed. Humanity seeps out of the dark sigil now that it is uncontained by the flame. The whole story of Dark Souls 1 is a creation myth. It details the rise of Gwyn, the creation of a mythos that guides humanity to sacrifice themselves for the first flame, and the establishment of the first iteration of the fire-linking cycle. It is about inheriting the will of the first Lord of Cinder, preserving the Age of Fire, and linking humanity to the fire forever. Dark Souls 2 focuses more on that cycle, its seeming inevitability, the attempts and failures to escape it, and our innate attraction to the flame. And finally, Dark Souls 3 is a story about the cycle's true and final end. The following is from an interview with Miyazaki. He is asked why the protagonist is referred to as unkindled, and how that is different from an undead from Dark Souls 1. It is translated from Chinese. I quote, "Dark Souls 3 can be defined as something born after the end, inheriting all things in the past. Dark Souls 1's protagonist is an undead, describing a story of passing on the flame. However, Dark Souls 3 depicts the undeads who didn't succeed in linking the fire, and failed to become cinder. Instead, they burnt out. The unkindled are born out of their remaining ashes. The unkindled exist to inherit the past, and put an end to the accumulated history." End quote. I'm always surprised when I read that. This is an incredibly crucial piece of lore that doesn't exist in-game. The unkindled are undead who literally were never kindling for the first flame. They attempted to link the fire, but were unworthy in some way. They failed to become a lord, and were burned to ash. The opening cinematic even shows the last boss dragging you back to the untended graves. The fading of the fire represents a civilization in a time of crisis. A Lord of Cinder is a redeeming hero that inherits the past and links it to the future, thereby extending the Age of Fire. But in Dark Souls 3 that is not enough anymore. The world in Dark Souls 3 is ancient. It is a world so old it can no longer sustain itself. It is the last iteration of the cycle. Prince Lothric was the very best the royal family could come up with. He was intended to be the hero of his age, but the prince rejected his duty, choosing instead to allow the fire to fade. When the link of fire is threatened, the bell tolls, unearthing the old lords of cinders from their graves. The old lords, however, also refused to link the fire. They no longer saw the value in that act. Let's take a moment to consider that. The lords refusing their thrones is the equivalent of Abraham Lincoln being revived to save the United States, but instead deciding to leave. The world of Dark Souls 3 is a civilization no one believes is worth saving. And so the flame, in its desperation, turned to the lowest of the low, the unkindled ash it had already rejected. The Ashen One is sent out to conquer the heroes of the past, reconcile them with the present, and link them to the future. But this is not that kind of story. The world of Dark Souls 3 is about a fire so old, a civilization so old, that it no longer has the material to revivify itself. Like Miyazaki said, Dark Souls 3 is about something born after the end. The unkindled exist to inherit all of the past and put an end to the accumulated history. There will be no linking to the future. This is the true end of the cycle. Ironically, this is most obvious if you choose the link of fire ending. There is no grand outburst of fire, like in Dark Souls 1. There is only a weak and paltry flame. The story of Dark Souls is a story of sacrifice. When the fire starts to fade, a champion rises. He inherits the past and sacrifices himself to preserve the age of fire. A new champion arises, inherits that will, and does the same. Eventually, every source of strength is tapped, every possible lead investigated, and every resource exhausted. There is nothing left to kindle the flame. Feeding even on its own cinders, the fire had consumed everything until the world itself turned to ash. But even that was not enough. Eventually, flame did fade, and only the dark remained. For anyone that hearest me still, thank you very much for watching. If my take on Dark Souls lore hasn't alienated you, well, I'm sure I will in a future video. Until then, may the flames guide thee.